Really excited to have in studio with us now Gregory Wrightstone, who wrote the book Inconvenient Facts, the science that Al Gore doesn't want you to know about.
So good.
You might remember some of the controversy over this because Apple removed you put up a really cool
smartphone app.
Yeah, smartphone app. And they removed it, right? Because, well, we think it's because it had information they don't want shared. But what did they claim? It was content or something?
Yeah, exactly. I rolled it out on the Glenn Beck show, and we had 15,000 downloads of the smartphone app within 24 or 48 hours, and it just exploded the popularity. 2 days later, after being on Glenn Beck's show, they took it. Apple removed it from the App Store. They said it lacked compelling content. And it was like, I went and I looked at the other climate change apps that they had out there that were, claiming catastrophe.
Yeah.
Well, these look like failed middle school science fair projects.
Well, yeah, but that's compelling content, Gregory.
Yeah.
That's compelling content.
It is back up. And if you can get it by looking for Inconvenient Facts on either Google Play or the App Store. Great information, very easily readable charts. You can have that. That way you can have all this information in the palm of your hand. That way, if you're having dinner with your crazy nephew Billy, and Billy says, "Hey, Uncle Pat, did you know polar bears are going extinct?" And you could pull this out and you go, "Well, wait a minute, Billy.
Nice.
Here's chart number 52 showing 60 years of population of polar bears."
Yeah.
And that's the power that you have with this information in your hands.
Yeah, because people confront you with that stuff all the time that they just regurgitate after hearing on CNN. And it's almost always false information, like frequency and intensity of hurricanes going up and continuing to go up, and tornado activity is at record high levels, which is completely untrue. In fact, May was a record low level for tornadoes. But I understand you just kind of been through both a hurricane and a tornado recently?
Yeah, we've got. I had my apartment in Arlington, Virginia. Arlington got hit by a tornado, and we had flooding into my apartment. Yet last week, we just bought a new home in Tampa, and we just got hit by a hurricane. The hurricane came through. So
you're being chased by global warming.
I don't know if you want me here this
morning. That is, it's kind of scary. We also had the infrastructure bill that has some ridiculous things in it to key climate-related components. It's being called drastic cuts, but what have you seen from the infrastructure bill and the climate change sections in it?
There's still a lot of money going into this. Not nearly as much as their first bill had. It seemed like nearly everything was related to climate change in some manner, whether it was transportation, refurbishing buildings, cap and trade system, all of these things. But from my viewpoint and what I see that the modest warming that we've seen since 1900, 0.8 of a degree centigrade of warming, that's not alarming to me. That warming combined with increasing CO2 is leading to an Earth and its ecosystems that are thriving and prospering.
Yeah, we're growing more food, which seems good to me.
Yeah, we're breaking records year after year after year. There's no end in sight for crop growth records. And think about it. With warming temperatures, and we are in a warming trend, that means we have lengthened growing seasons. Right. And that's turbocharged by what's called CO2 fertilization effect. More CO2. You remember back in middle school, you learned that with photosynthesis. There's one of the basic building blocks for plant growth. And with more CO2, it's turbocharging plant growth. And that's one of the main reasons we're seeing just these great increases of crop growth.
As far as this infrastructure bill, it has $7.5 billion set aside for EV stations, which are powered right now by diesel fuel.
Do we have that tweet, Rob?
Yeah, show that if you have it, Rob.
Okay,
yeah, there it is.
The story on this one, what is it? How many miles per gallon does it actually get? I think
it's 5.
5
miles to the gallon, because you're powering the electricity with the diesel, and it seems a little bit counterproductive. So anyway, these kinds of foolhardy solutions just keep going around in Washington. What can we do to affect a positive change? Look, let's stick with what we have until we find a better alternative.
Exactly. Let's just look about the hurricane that hit Florida this year. Well, if we're going to fully electric vehicles, think about this. They claim that they get 150 or whatever the mileage in range, but that's cut significantly in both cold weather if you're using your heater or in hot weather if you're using your air conditioning. Think about now we've got 3 million people fleeing a hurricane in their electric vehicles. They're all going to need to charge about the same point, and they're only going to probably be able to get 80 or 90 miles from their home base. It's just crazy to think that we can do this.
It's really unbelievable. Was it over the weekend when Brian Stelter did his segment?
He had David Wallace Wells.
David Wallace Wells
was the
right
catastrophic author of a book. He claimed that there were 10 million climate change related deaths per year. He said it was
akin to the Holocaust.
Yeah, worse than the Holocaust every year. The 10 million.
Gosh.
How did they get away with this?
But it flies in the face of the science, the facts, and the data. We know extreme weather-related deaths have declined. They have an increase. They've declined, get this, 99% since the early 1900s. 99% decrease in extreme weather-related deaths. Now, a lot of that has to do with better prediction, be careful.
Yes, you can warn them sooner.
Right. But it's completely flies in the face, completely opposite of what they are claiming. We also see that cold temperatures kill 15 to 20 times as many people as hot weather. So we can claim by that global warming saves lives because as you raise temperatures, you're going to have fewer cold-related deaths.
Incredible. Speaking of the heat and heat-related deaths, they're claiming I don't know how many they're saying happened in the Pacific Northwest recently, but now these experts, climate scientists, 27 of them, are saying that the Canadian heat wave and the heat wave that we just had in the Northwest is virtually impossible without climate change.
Well, that's just factually not correct. They're claiming, let's just give them credit. Let's say we've gotten 2 degrees of warming based on climate change.
In 120 years.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that can't explain an odd 30 to 50 degree record of temperature. Okay,
right.
Maybe instead of 30 degrees over the record without their so-called climate change, it would have been 28 degrees over the record. Well, this was an extreme weather event, so they're conflating weather. They're mistaking weather with climate. You know for sure if it was 30 degrees below the record low temperature, they'd be completely silent about that, or they would use that as proof.
Climate chaos.
That's exactly what they do.
Yeah.
They have the nerve to take both sides of the issue. If it's incredibly hot, that's climate change, and if it's incredibly cold, that's climate change. Yeah. We actually saw recently, was it yesterday or the day before?
Yeah, we had a video. Yeah.
Yesterday we had a video where they found newspaper articles from 1859 where it hit 133 degrees.
In the same areas that they have the heat wave last week.
In 1859, birds were dropping out of trees dead. It was so hot.
Yeah. And they're going to, we can, again, they're looking at a very small range of time frame here. They like what what I said, the catastrophists, I call them, the fear mongers. They want to only look at the last 50 or 80 or 100 years of data. And as a geologist, I put this in what's happening today in the much longer term perspective. And remember I said we were in a warming trend? Well, that warming trend started more than 300 years ago, long before we started adding prodigious amounts of CO2 to the atmosphere. That was in the depths of what was called the Little Ice Age, the horrific Little Ice Age. It's thought to be one of the coldest periods on Earth in the last 10,000 years, and occurred a little over 300 years ago. So the warming trend we're in right now is blissfully bringing us out of that death-dealing cold of the Little Ice Age. It was thought during that period 1/3 of the entire population of the Earth perished. Half of the population of Iceland perished. In fact, they were considering abandoning all of Iceland at that time due to the extreme cold. And we know what happened to the Vikings during that time. They disappeared, never to be heard from again, on Greenland.
What do you say to the people who continually just throw out things like the hurricanes are more intense and more frequent. Tornadoes, more intense and more frequent. Wildfires burning down California and Australia, that wouldn't happen without climate change. How do you respond to those?
Well, I look at the science, the facts, and the data. I go back and, for example, fires in North America, believe it or not, based on the National Interagency Fire Service, which deals with all things fire in North America and the United States, we've had a significant decline in both the area and the number of fires dating back to the early 1900s.
A decline.
A decline. We're right now about 25% of the number and area burned during that time. It's completely flies in the face. Yes, 2020 was a bad year in California. There are a lot of things that went into that. For fire seasons to be bad, you need two things. You need drought and you need an intense heat wave. And you need a spark. You need an ignition source. But if we put this in the long-term perspective, we've seen that not only just in the United States, but worldwide, we've seen a significant decline in fires worldwide in both area burned and number. And we see tornadoes for sure have been in decline over the last several decades. That's clear and stark.
Record-setting lack of tornadoes in May. We're speaking with Gregory Wrightstone, author of Inconvenient Facts. We'll talk to him a little bit more coming up in a minute. First, let me tell you about Real Estate Agents I Trust. Real Estate Agents I Trust, it's Glenn's company. He put this together because he had such a bad experience with selling his home in Connecticut. And it went on and on and on. And so his home value dropped precipitously. And so he wanted that not to happen to you. And he put together this group of agents across the nation. They vet them very carefully for their track records and for their marketing plans. And these are people who know what they're doing and will see you through the whole process. Somebody you can really count on. Thus the name Real Estate Agents I Trust. Go to realestateagentsitrust.com. Realestateagentsitrust.com.
It's Pat Gray Unleashed on the Blaze.
So mainly, where are you now? After having written Inconvenient Facts, is there a website that people can find you at? And
yeah, I've been in a little bit of transition. I've actually, my mission is to get the science and the facts that's actually happening about climate change out there. And part of this, I recently took over as executive director for the CO2 Coalition in Arlington, Virginia. And I'm leading, this is a group of scientists, 70 of some of the top scientists in the world.
70?
70 top scientists.
Okay. What about the consensus that everybody believes it's catastrophic and happening right now?
Yeah. Well, these guys, they're people like Dr. Richard Lindzen, atmospheric physicist out of MIT. Our chair is Will Happer, atmospheric physicist out of Princeton. We've got Dr. Patrick Moore, co-founder of Greenpeace. All of these people sit on our board, and we're fighting this. And again, this group, we stick to the science and try and stay out of the politics.
That's hard to do.
And it is hard to do in this subject. But we want to rise above it and provide the actual true science out there. And it's great working with these people. And so we're using that as a new platform to get this information. Really, it's a positive message of an Earth that's thriving and prospering, and humanity's benefiting from the changes we see in climate change. It's stark. By almost every metric we look at, we see the Earth's ecosystems thriving and prospering. And it's completely, your listeners are going, what? They've never heard that before. Maybe they had if they've heard me or when you've had another guest on. But it's really, I call it the biggest untold story of the late 20th and early 21st century. It's this Earth that's thriving and prospering. And because we can look at it, the Earth is greening. In other words, vegetation's increasing. Up to 50% of the Earth's surface has an increase in vegetation. Less than 4% of the Earth's surface is what they call browning or desertification. In other words, it's vegetation's deep. That's a great trade-off. That's a great trade-off. I'll take
I would think so, yeah.
I take that any day of the week. And that's exemplified by what we talked about earlier with is crop growth, which is exploding. Another good thing.
Meanwhile, the alarmists are always saying the opposite, that the Earth is in catastrophic failure, where there's drought and fires and hurricanes and tornadoes. like the world has never seen before. And every single year, come what may, they tell you it was the hottest year we've ever experienced. What do you say to those people?
Yeah, well, they're using anything that goes bad, any catastrophe, they're tying it to climate change. We just saw that in the condo collapse. Jennifer Granholm.
That's climate change.
Yeah, it was Jennifer Granholm, Energy Secretary, blamed it on climate change. And it's patently false. It just is. That is just not true. I mean, I looked at Miami's sea level rise record. The sea level is rising today at the same rate it was 120 years ago. There's been no increase, no acceleration due to any man-made influences. And is last year or the last decade warmer than the year warmer in history? Well, if your history only goes back to 1800 or 1850 or 1900, that would be true, because remember we say we're warming, well, so the most recent temperatures would be higher. But if we put this in a long-term perspective, that's just not true. We saw 3 other great warming periods over the last 4,000 or 5,000 years that were warmer than today. And remember, too, they say, oh, my God, we can't let it get 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees warmer, or we're going to have crop failure. Plants are going to die, and we're all going to die, and famine. Well, what happened? What happened in the past over the last 5,000 years when it did get that warm? I'll tell you what happened. Civilizations rose up. Great empires arose. There was a reason the Romans wore togas. It was really warm. And that was a time of great prosperity.
Yeah.
And it was much warmer. We know for a fact it was much warmer then than today. And the fact of the matter is, it was the cooling periods between each of these warm periods that were horrific. They were catastrophic. And what we found when it started cooling consistently, we saw crop failure, famine, pestilence, and mass depopulation. It's a completely opposite of what we're being told. We're being told that we're going to die because it's getting too warm. History, if we look back through climate history and human history, just the opposite has occurred.
Do you have a hard time getting on, say, CNN or shows where they'd be more confrontational?
Yeah, I'm waiting for that call. No, they and in fact
they don't want to talk about it, do they? They don't want the truth to be told.
Yeah, and in fact, in that CNN interview, they had their content provider, whatever her title, I forget what her title is. She was on. She stated that we need to tie everything we can to climate change, and we don't need to interview any experts. And so, and she stated that. And they don't want us. They need to silence people like me and the scientists of the CO2 Coalition. Forget that they don't want us to get our message out there. And I'll tell you what, I'm an optimist. I think that the great population that we see here in the United States, I think there's an overwhelming percentage that have great skepticism and doubt about this link between man-made warming and catastrophism. I just about every random person I talk to are just thirsty for this information. The information that's in the book and on the smartphone app, they're thirsty for it when I talk to them about it, and they accept it. And it just people. I think they're overreaching with this, Pat. And I think when they're tying condo collapses to climate change, I mean. That's an overreach.
Yeah, and they're contradicting themselves. They used to continually say, when we would say, look, it's 35 below zero this week in Havre, Montana. Well, don't confuse weather with climate. But now they do the exact same thing every summer. Every summer.
Exactly. And nobody would know it, but South America, in the southern hemisphere, just experienced a tremendous cold. It's their winter now. It's our summer here. They had a huge cold snap. There was as much as 20 degrees. They broke records most over South America and up into Central America. But again, when I looked at that, it was being blamed on climate change. So this huge cold snap across South America, the cold snap in France earlier this year, again, it destroyed maybe 80% of the French wine crops. And it was blamed on climate change.
It's pretty hard to win this discussion when the other side claims victory no matter what happens. When they're on both sides of the issue, and both extremes are due to climate change. Well, how do you argue with that? What do you do with that?
Yeah. I think you throw it up, you make fun of them when we can, and it's pretty easy to do. and they don't have much of a sense of humor.
No.
I can
That's
tell
for
you
sure.
that.
No,
that's for sure.
And more long term, I think this ties back to an earlier conversation we had here on the program, is you homeschool. And you make sure that your kids aren't taught this propaganda on a daily basis. And I think the tweet that came in earlier spoke volumes when we showed the Pride Month calendar of things they're doing in that classroom. Oh, I miss the simpler times when we just indoctrinated our kids on climate change.
Yeah, we've got at the CO2 Coalition, we've just launched an initiative about that, to deal with that, an education initiative. And
that's excellent.
That's
what we need.
We do. We realize it's going to be a tough road to hoe and probably can't get into the public schools, but we can target our message, put out a science-based message to the homeschoolers.
Oh, keep us updated on that.
And
That's great.
I think there's a great market for that. We're creating our first video. We're teaming up with a group out of Brazil called Intelectos. It's a similar science-based group down there. They're trying to get the message out about the rainforest and what's actually happening in the rainforest. The woman we work with there,
Which is?
you can't burn a rainforest. All right.
Okay.
There's a reason it's called the rainforest, because it's really wet.
It rains.
Right.
Yeah.
You can cut it down and then burn it. All right. But and most of the fires that we see down in the so-called rainforest are really grasslands that they burn off every year. And it's part of the things they've been doing for decades, actually hundreds of years down there. So it's pretty funny. She just laughs about it.
And the other, what was that, 2-3 years ago when they had the big fires that were happening in and near the rainforest, and they claimed that 20% of the world's oxygen came from the rainforest.
Well, that's a good story if you're on their side, but it's just not true.
It's just not true.
It's just not true, and that's what they're
Right.
talking about. Their scientists have looked into that, and it's really, if anything, it's probably a net sink. In other words, there's probably a negative effect that the trees are actually sucking up more, and the forest there is actually a negative, slightly, but not much. But it's certainly not, as it's being presented, as the lungs of the world is what they were calling it.
Yes,
And it's like, that was the terminology,
Lungs
lungs
of the
of the world.
Hey, as you guys develop at the CO2 Coalition this kind of educational materials to combat this kind of climate nonsense propaganda, please make sure that you keep me in the loop on that, because I know
Yeah.
that this audience will eat that up.
Well, I tell you what, I'm going to come back. I'm going to hold you to that, because we've got some really excited, really smart people that are working on this,
That'd be great.
and you guys could help us get that out there.
We'd love to. We really would. Meantime, where can people get what is the app called? And they can get it pretty much anywhere now, right?
Yeah, Google Play, App Store. Search for
Back on Apple.
Right, search for Inconvenient Facts. Everybody listening,
And again, it's got all kinds of facts that you can refute the nonsense coming from the other side. Right?
Exactly. And you can go to inconvenientfacts.xyz to learn more about me and the book.
Okay.
But my main gig right now is the CO2 Coalition, which you can learn at co2coalition.org. If
All
you're
right.
looking to do
Check it
something,
out.
we take donations. I want to get our message out there at the
Thanks,
CO2
Gregory.
Coalition.